and we'll get started. So this is a due diligence survey results session, and this has been a joint project by BWF and PyroTalks. So this is the contents for today. So we're just going to have a quick recap of what the background is of this survey and how it came about, scope and methodology of how we conducted it, starting off with some of the key findings straight away, and then we'll go into each report aspect of the results, and we'll close with some recommendations and a Q&A. So just a few notes. We do have a full report ready for this. It should be available either this week or next week, but we'll send it to everyone on this email list. The currency that we're reporting today is Great British Pound, and that's due to the vast majority of the entries being in the UK and dotted around Europe. We've also got space at the end for a Q&A. The actual content should take about 30-40 minutes, so it'd be great if you've got any questions to pop them in the Q&A here. You should be able to add them in this box at the bottom, and then we can ask any at the end, even if you want me to go back to a slide, or you just want to discuss with people here, I guess, some of the points being raised. So we'll get started then. So a bit of the background of the survey. So due diligence, I think, has been an established part of our prospect development teams for some time, although I think the actual development of the knowledge or execution of due diligence is still fairly new. I think most people would agree with that. And in this kind of early stage of still trying to refine our processes, hasn't really been some kind of central resource which allows us to compare what we're all doing across organisations. And that was the gap we wanted to fill, BWF and PyroTalks, that's the gap we wanted to fill with this survey. And so we hope that the survey answers these key 7 points here. So compare business processes, contrast risk priorities, benchmark trigger levels, measure funding, clarify average report times of volume, gain insight into the standard gift acceptance committees, and lastly, give confidence in our own departmental approach. So those are the aims of the survey. So scope of methodology, we issued this in June 2021. We had 104 complete responses. There were more responses, but these were the ones where we felt they completed the whole survey. We did develop the questions with insight from the community as well. And we targeted really the full spectrum of not-for-profits, any organisation that had a due diligence programme, we invited to take part. And so, that ended up being a range of organisations, from medical all the way through to arts and culture, higher education, and sports organisations even. So the total collective income of all respondents, probably about 1 billion, maybe higher actually. And of course, this is the first time there's been a survey like this, so we don't have any year-on-year analysis, but that is going to be interesting as we hopefully go forward with this survey. And yes, what I will be doing today is I'll be first just kind of taking the main results of the question, just having a quick look at those. And if there's any interesting comparisons or cross-examination with other results, I'll try to make them, which hopefully can give us a bit more meaning and context to the results that we are viewing. So I thought it'd be good to just start with an overview, really, of what the key findings were. And there's definitely some positives coming out, but I think still in its early stages, there are some areas of, well, challenge really. And you'll see these 5 key findings. And the first one was, it was quite divided on key issues, the results. So essentially, it was often quite split, the results, whether you had a gift acceptance committee or not, was kind of 50-50, whether you had any official training was kind of 50-50, and there was a lot of results like that throughout the whole survey. So it's kind of this split results. The other one was inconsistent deployment. So those organisations that were comparable, let's say, so they had the same, say, income band, income bracket, or same level of team, or etc. How they deployed their due diligence seemed to vary greatly, massive polar opposites. And we'll come to look at some of those. I think the sector definitely felt underfunded and not always taken seriously, was some of the things that were coming through. And there was a varying level of confidence. I think in general, everyone felt confident with the processes that they had themselves created, but they weren't necessarily confident on how their department would deal with a crisis if one were to occur. But throughout all this, there definitely is an emerging image of good practice. There's definitely some clear leaders in the results, and I think there are going to be some useful initial benchmarks from this. So just having a look who's responded then. So got respondents by sector here. So we can see the vast majority here, 57% were education, and a small part of that was independent schools. But the vast majority of that 57% was universities. And then we've got our medical organisations here, and then we've got arts and culture. In other, we had things like international development, we had some sports organisations, even some military organisations, and that kind of made up the category of other. So respondents by size, so this was by actual full size of a fundraising department, and we can see here just a general spread of results. So essentially, you know, what this says in some ways is departments of all sizes are doing due diligence now, all the way from 1 to 4, all the way to 50+ team sizes. And here's the size of the due diligence team itself. So this was by full-time equivalent of due diligence. So we can see here, and this perhaps is not unexpected, but the vast majority of teams were 1 or less, with a very small number having even 5 to 9. And I think this question we might want to refine for next time, just so we can get that delineation between part of a role and not all just one individual. But I think that's probably people in doing due diligence would expect that the vast majority of people would either have one person doing due diligence, or it's part of their role at 81%. And so we'll send all these results out in the report if you're just joining us, so you can have a look at the stats in your own time. So here, respondents by annual income. So again, we've got a fairly good spread of organisations that have entered a response. And again, I think this shows that due diligence is being taken up by organisations of all sizes and all income levels. So we've got 1 million or less, all the way up to 25 million plus as their income. A response by major gift threshold. We thought this question might be useful to add because how we do due diligence can often relate to what we consider a major gift. And so we thought it might be an interesting question to ask: what level do people consider a major gift? And for me personally, I think if this was even done maybe even 5 years ago, we might have seen a much more leaning towards 5 to 10,000 as being the definition of a major gift for organisations. But I think now, as we have gone on with major gift fundraising, I feel like we're pushing up the threshold even higher to what a major gift is these days. And we can see here 25,000 to 100,000, 29%, and then even 100,000 plus starting their major gift definition. So confidence, now we're just getting to the actual results of the survey itself. So I thought we'd start here really, kind of getting a feeling of how professionals are feeling in the sector. And then we can kind of unpick some of that as we go along through the actual other results. And that might indicate why people are feeling this way. So this first question then, how confident are you that your due diligence process is sufficient to protect your organisation's reputation? So we've got about 65% here saying 4 confident or 5 very confident, you know, above. So essentially we've got about 35% feeling either unsure about feeling confident or not confident at all. And I think really if you do have a 3, if you're unsure about whether or not you feel that your process is going to protect the organisation, I do feel like that's probably more not confident than confident. So personally, I was expecting this kind of result, say 65% feeling confident. I think the sector is still learning in this area, but I do think as we go along doing this survey, I'm sure this should go up to about 80% or more of people feeling confident in their process. But I thought what we would do kind of straight away was have a look at contrasting this finding with some other results and seeing whether there's a bit more meaning behind it. So what I wanted to see was whether or not training had an effect on how confident people felt about their due diligence process. And what we found was 70% of those who cited 4 confident to 5 very confident said yes to having training. And for those who cited 3 unsure to 1 not confident at all, 65% said no to having training. So I feel like that does indicate, and perhaps almost goes without saying, that having training does increase your confidence in your process. So how seriously do you organise it? How seriously do you think due diligence is taken in your organization. So this one, I guess, is even a bit more split. So we've got about, it's just about 55%, let's say, of organizations feeling confident, feeling that the organization does take it seriously versus very seriously. So again, that's a reasonably split result. And that's saying for those 3 and above, are not particularly feeling like the organization is taking due diligence seriously. And I think we will unpick some of why that feeling is as we go along. If a PI crisis were to occur, are you confident your department would know what steps to take? Again, I think we've got another split result here with it's again just under 50%. I think they're not really feeling confident, and then for 4 and above, those are feeling confident. So again, that shows quite a split result. And I think, you know, really the due diligence, as we know, is a whole department process. And hopefully this indicates some of the importance of that, or at least we can explore how far we feel our whole department is taking or getting involved with due diligence. So I hope that set the scene with some of the feelings of what's going on in due diligence. And this section is going to look at triggers and authority. So what triggers due diligence and who authorizes the various different donations? So who accepts the donations or rejects them? So we're starting at the kind of very bottom end of due diligence here. So in your standard process, what is the gift solicitation amount at which your lowest due diligence process is activated? So I think really this question is about when does your due diligence start in terms of monetary terms? And I would imagine that usually this means, you know, the reports are maybe not as detailed, or it's about a lower, if you like, less senior staff members signing off these donations. But anyway, we've got, I think, a fairly reasonable or fairly even spread of thresholds. So we can see the majority, however, is 5,000 to 10,000. That's when they start their due diligence process. But again, we can see more and more people starting at 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 even. And in other, it had things like sometimes often £1,000. For me personally, I thought we would see more on the far left again. I thought we'd see more starting at 5,000 to 10,000. So yeah. So just looking here about cross-examining these results, we wanted to see really whether there was a correlation between higher income of an organisation and a higher threshold where they started their due diligence. And we can see here 5 organisations with an income of 25 million plus started their due diligence with a donation level of 5,000, whereas another 5 with the same income, so 25 million plus, started at 100,000. And I think this kind of is beginning to show that polarization. So organisations within the same income band doing things quite differently. And I guess this raises the question, doesn't it, about what is proportionate and how do we decide where these thresholds should be? You know, are we looking to our internal feeling of ethics? Are we looking externally to see what type of donations and levels of donations the press tend to report on? It wasn't necessarily clear where all these decisions were coming from, and I think that comes up throughout. And I guess there is a question again as well, if you have a 25 million income, should we really be starting the due diligence at 5,000? It's difficult to say really what the right answer is. So we've got the donation level, but who is the lead or principal person authorizing signature for when the gift is accepted at the lowest level? So when these gifts come in at this lower level, who is signing them off, accepting them or rejecting them? And we can see probably here, as expected, 42% of organizations cited their director as the person who would be the signature signing off those lower level gifts. We can see that, you know, we've got head as well, 24%, manager 18%. I think I was surprised to see some CEOs sign off these gift levels, but you know, let's have a look at that. So I think when I was looking at these results, and I think perhaps it's a comment in the sector in general, we're signing off our own donations, and it does raise a question of neutrality really. And I don't think though we can necessarily avoid it because of the funding challenges that all not-for-profits face. And I did expect or wonder whether or not those CEOs that were signing off donations at that lower level whether or not that was because they were in smaller income organizations. So if you own an income of 1 million or less, they tend to be smaller organizations. The CEO is more involved with the day-to-day, which is quite often the case. But what I found here was an organization which did have an income of 25 million above, and they were signing off due diligence donation levels with a threshold of 25,000 as their starting area. So yeah, I don't know necessarily whether that's a proportionate use of someone's time, and there's more things that come through like that. But I think this is the kind of thing the survey raises. If we're looking at the previous things like here, you know, whether or not a CEO should be signing off these lower levels, the benchmark seems to be that no, this is more like a director level decision or head decision. So here we're going to the higher end now. So the kind of the biggest level of donation, and where does that start? Where do we start that process? So in your standard process, what is the highest gift solicitation amount at which your due diligence level is activated? So we can see this is much more to the right here. The results really are saying, you know, around about 100,000 or even 500,000 is where they consider their highest level of due diligence to start. And again, we've got some lower level ones here at 5,000 and 10,000. So again, who is the person that signs these off? Who is the lead or principal authorizing signature for whether these gifts are accepted at this highest level? So perhaps as expected, again, we've got CEO on the top here now as the individual who signs off that level of donation. And in other, that did include a lot of gift acceptance committee. And next time, you know, it was an oversight really, we should have that in as a choice next time as a gift acceptance committee, especially for these higher levels. And we can see again, you know, trustees as well, if it's not the CEO. So it really is leaning towards very senior individuals signing off these big gifts. Just kind of having a look around at some of the results. And again, the question of appropriate responsibility came up. And again, we had an organization here of 25 million plus, and that cited their highest threshold was 500,000, but that was being signed off by a head. And, you know, there's not to say there's anything wrong with doing that. It's just more that person will have a lot of responsibility, it seems, then sign off those donations, what could be doing that on their own. So do your thresholds take into account cumulative totals? And so essentially this is if someone gives a donation over 3 years and that passes 100,000 threshold, are we tracking those things? Because if that person now gets more public recognition because they've passed 100,000, you know, should they therefore be getting the appropriate due diligence as if they've donated 100,000? And that's what this was trying to capture. And we can see here, again, fairly split with 42% saying no, they don't do that, 58% saying yes, they do that. And this was put in more really as, you know, question mark for those organizations that feel that it might be an exposure point for them, and maybe that is something they should consider. So I thought this question was really interesting. So in general, at what stage in the relationship is your due diligence triggered? So here, we obviously have started to look at what gift bands we start to activate different levels of due diligence. But the question here is within that gift band, if you like, at what point do we trigger it? And I guess in some cases, just in general, if we're not using gift bands, at what point do we start the actual process of the due diligence and research and so forth? And we can see here 40% just start just before an ask, which again, I think was expected because this is when usually a fundraiser would request research, isn't it? They would request that because they're going to say, I'm about to ask this person for donation, please can you start the due diligence process? And so we can see a high number of individuals starting their due diligence then. I think what was interesting to see was when a prospect is first researched at 20%. And personally, it's my feeling that over time that will increase. I imagine a quick, and it's what we started to do in the end when I was running research at university. In the end, we started to do a quick initial prospect due diligence review when the prospects have been researched, and this allowed hopefully saving a lot of pain later if something does come out and the relationship has been built for a very long time. So my feeling is that might increase because it could actually be a time saver. But further down, we can see here 8% when the prospect is to be assigned, which again might be similar to the research one, and just after an ask and at the time a gift agreement is made. So the vast majority are doing it before that, and some are doing it after the donation is made. So, there might be some investigations there about where the best timing is. So additional responsibility, this next part was looking at the other areas that we're doing due diligence. So, and it kind of raises the question about what due diligence is for. And I know most of us do due diligence for the reasons of philanthropic reputation of the organization. But I think in general, because we have that skill set, we do get asked to do due diligence elsewhere too. And in fact, maybe that's the purpose of our due diligence, to look after the reputation as a whole. But anyway, either way, we are definitely doing some additional due diligence. So 66% of organizations said that they do due diligence on leadership volunteers. And we can see here speakers, the majority do not, where it is appropriate that we have a speaker at our organization. And here we've got only degrees, so obviously this won't be applicable to everyone, but we can see again a fairly split result here of almost 50-50 do and 50% don't. And I imagine if you're doing prospect research on alumni, you're raising donations from alumni, I would have thought this might be higher, but maybe these things are being looked after elsewhere in different departments. But we can see here 79% do look and do due diligence on their prospective corporate partners. So do you have a due diligence gift acceptance committee? So we had 50%, 58% that said yes, and 42% that said no. And I thought this might have been higher than this. And again, I feel like this is a fairly split result, whether or not you do have a gift acceptance committee, considering how important it can be for objectivity and so forth, and sharing responsibility for donations. Yeah, I was expecting that to be higher. So I just thought we'd kind of look into this a little bit more about the gift acceptance committees. And I wanted to see whether or not this affected how seriously they felt their organisation took due diligence. And it's not a flawless approach looking at it in these kind of ways, but what we found was, for those who cited 5, yes, I feel my organisation takes due diligence very seriously, 89% said yes to having a committee. And for those that cited, no, I don't feel like it's taken seriously at all, 75% said no to having a committee. So I feel like that does, one way or another, send a strong message, having a committee, to the organisation and its staff, that they do take due diligence seriously. And of course, if that's the way it feels internally, surely that's how it would be perceived externally as well. If donations were to go wrong, then knowing that there's a gift acceptance committee seems to have this sense of elevating how important it's taken. Of those who had an income of 25 million or above, 65% had a committee. So it's kind of showing that in some ways, the higher the income, the more likely you were to have a committee, whereas 71% of those with an income of 1 million or less did not. So who is on the due diligence gift acceptance committee? So this is the number of responses. So we had 44 organisations that said their director of fundraising was on their committee. And actually the other category here, a lot of people just answered things like director, they gave a different name for director of fundraising. So things like director of development, director of advancement, and so forth. So obviously next time we need to just kind of make that question a bit clearer. So really what that would mean then is the vast majority, or there's a big volume of organisations where the director of fundraising is present. And then again, we have most senior in second place, which makes sense. And I thought what was good to see here and higher than perhaps I was expecting was neutral member. So a 20 organisations with their committees where they had a neutral member on the gift acceptance committee. So that's obviously helping for objectivity, for decision making, and to help that neutrality. And then we go further down and we can see the rest here. So I would have thought prospect researcher might have been higher, but having a researcher on the committee whilst they're making these decisions, so they can go into the research, how it's conducted, what resources they used, seems like a good thing. They don't have to have a factor on the decision in the end, but perhaps they can be there as support for the actual how the research was conducted. And then some other ones here, media relations and gift affected party. And I think obviously media relations is kind of suggesting an expert, of media within the organisation and how our reputation exists in the public eye. So I imagine that's more for bigger organisations. Or here, gift accepted party, where there's an organisation that's probably larger, there's different departments or different arms and different functions, and the donation is coming in for that particular area or department. Then having a gift affected party can help make that decision too. But I think hopefully the idea of this slide really is giving us ideas as well. If we don't have a committee, these are the ways we can put one together. If we do have a committee, these are ways of advancing the committee that we've already put together. So risk factors then. So what are our teams actually looking at when they do their due diligence? So we've got the results up here, and we can see on the left here, these are the actual topics that we look at, research priorities, and we've put that in order of number 1 ranked. So the question was to rank their priorities by the top 3. So we put here in order the percentage of those who ranked it as number 1, so the most important. And here we've got the average ranking as well. So where it was ranked, at what score did it get? So for example, misalignment of organizational values was often ranked at number 2. And then we've got here number of rankings. So the amount of times it was ranked. In other words, the amount of times it entered the top 3. So that's quite a good indicator of how popular some of these were. So we've got here, number 1 here, clear leader at financial crime, corruption and bribery at 42%. And we can see here as well the volume of responses. We've got pending prominent allegations and negative views. And so, that feels, doesn't it, to answer most concerns, negative views. It's a very broad header, isn't it? And so hopefully most things are covered there. Misalignment of organizational values was good to see so high. So obviously organizations checking not only, okay, they may have a good reputation, but also we need to check whether their activities align with our values too. So that came in that 2nd place. But what I think what came in quite low was conflict of interest. So this is looking at things like favoritism from a donor in their donation, or having undue influence on an organization or department or function as a result of their donation. And that came in at only 1% ranked, that was number 1. And it was only ranked a total of 23 times. So it's definitely one of the lowest rankings that we had. And I just looked into this a bit more in terms of the UK, and the Charity Commission does say that assessment of conflicts of interest must be part of the due diligence process to help reduce conditions that could undermine the charity's independence. So I think some of us may be looking at that in another heading, perhaps, but if we're not, it's worth double checking whether or not we are doing that kind of research, or how we might be doing that kind of research, or should we be doing it in the future. So we've got report volume and time. So this was quite a contentious, or is a contentious conversation, I think, topic for those that are doing due diligence. And I think obviously this is really where the decisions that departments make about how due diligence is deployed really affects their job, how much work they do. So we want to spend a bit more time in this area, breaking some of the results down. So here is the question about how many reports do we do per year? So how many full due diligence reports do you complete per year on average? So we've got 1 to 9 at 35%, 10 to 24 at 24%, 25 to 49 at 16%. So, really the vast majority are doing really between 1 to 50 reports. Yes, but then we can see at the end here on the far right, we're starting to see an increase, 100 plus reports. So it's an interesting balance of results there. But, I think really a lot of us are kind of sat in this area, aren't we, doing our reports. So I just wanted to kind of look at that a bit more deeply. So what I decided to do was look at this by income level. Organisations will often categorise ourselves by income level. So I thought it'd be useful to see what are the most common responses. So you can see for organisations with an income of 1 million or less, 1 to 9 reports was their most common response at 35%. For those with an income of 2 to 5 million, 1 to 9 was also their most common response at 71%. For 5 to 10, income of 5 to 10 million, 10 to 24 was their most common response at 42%. And for 10 to 25 million, 10 to 24 to 25 to 50 was their most common response. So they had basically the same amount for each, 31% each. And then what was interesting, at 25 million, they jumped all the way to 100 plus was their most common response. And I think this is obviously showing kind of the higher income we have, the more reports we tend to be doing. So that seems to be a logical journey. But I thought to break that down again a little bit more and have a look here. So, you know, within those income bands, there are still extremes. So this bullet point here, of those with an income of 25 million above, 30% conducted 1 to 9 reports per year. So, you know, that was the second highest response, and it's not far off 35%. So again, in this 37%, so again, in this income band, we've got big polar differences. We've got one organisation at 25 million doing 100 reports per year, then one organisation doing, or some organisations doing 1 to 9 reports per year. And even in the 1 million or less category, 7% conducted 100 reports per year, even though the most common one was 1 to 9 again. So I think this illustrates, to me at least, that the volume of reports we do is not necessarily linked to the volume of income. It's more linked to a decision that we're making about the process, as opposed to, natural consequence of increasing income volume. So I just thought those polar opposites were really interesting for each income level. So I think just like it caught my eye, what is a full report? I guess for those that have been doing this for a while, full report really is just, sometimes people do say like a quick 15-minute negative news search on Google or some other resource. A full report is where we spend time to actually comb over each individual issue and put it into a format that is then going to be reviewed by some senior staff at some point once or another. So how long does each report take? So we know what volume we're doing, so how long are we taking on each? So we can see here, the most common response was 48% at 2 to 4 hours, and 5 to 8 hours at 35%. And perhaps, I think it's probably one of the most clear results in the survey. And I guess it is showing if you're spending 1 hour or less per report, then maybe it's worth checking the level of detail that we're going into. And then if you're doing 9 or more, maybe it's just doing slightly too much information, but who knows how much we really need to do to protect our organisations. So, but nonetheless, the sector really is sitting between 2 to 8 hours. So when we have a look at this in a bit more detail, I wanted to just kind of investigate really was, let's say an organisation is doing 100 reports. Could that be because they do, you know, a smaller time per report? So they only spend an hour, let's say, on each report, which is why they're able to get through so many reports. But that isn't what we really found. So some organisations that conducted 100 plus reports spent 9 or more hours per report. And they even had a team of 1 or less. So in reality, what was happening there was an individual somewhere, maybe they were on this call today, but they were spending 900 hours per year on due diligence. I think that's pretty much half of someone's time. And maybe that's their full job, doing due diligence, but nonetheless, in the same with the same level of reports, 100 plus, again with the same team volume of 1 or less, they spent 2 to 4 hours per report. So that's less than half the time that this other person was spending. So again, that shows that kind of polarization of results here, depending on the various different levels of comparable organizations. So resource, we're coming up to the last 2 parts now. So resource, what is your non-staff budget specifically for due diligence? So here, this question, maybe we need to refine this slightly for next time, but the aim of this question was to see whether or not we have specific budgets for due diligence at all. You know, is it taken seriously enough that we are now having our own budget lines for due diligence? And I guess if something were to ever happen, being able to show and demonstrate how much you spend on due diligence could be a good thing, perhaps. But so anyway, we had 53% of people who did not have a specific budget for due diligence. Nonetheless, within there, they were quoting normal research budgets and that they also spent on due diligence. So, but the volume of those were very similar to what's spread out here. We did have one person, I think, with the highest budget of 25,000 cite as their full research budget. But nonetheless, we're kind of zooming in here at specific due diligence budgets. So we can see here again the front runner at 0 to 1,000, 20%, then a fairly even spread of specific due diligence budgets. So again, I just want to kind of look at this a little bit closer. Does an income level, higher income, does that equate to a higher budget? There was no real significant, correlation with that. We can see here all the income levels through from 1 million or less through to 10 to 25, all cited 0 to 1,000 as their most common budget. If you had an income of 25 million, the most common budget was 10,000, but again, in second place at 29% was 0 to 1,000. So again, a kind of polarization. I don't know if we've got an income of 25 million and we're only specifically designating less than 1,000 for due diligence. Yeah, well, I think that might explain some of these next questions in a moment. So how do you feel that due diligence, your due diligence team is funded compared to other teams in your fundraising department? So the question here was really to try and get the person to think about their wider department. Probably we all feel underfunded, I guess, one way or another, although not everyone, but the question was really to kind of get the person to think in terms of others. So I guess that's what it's doing. Either way, we can see people are feeling pretty underfunded. So only 2% felt very well funded, and only 13% felt well funded. And the rest, really, I guess, if you're not feeling either here nor there, you're not feeling well funded. And we had 2 not feeling underfunded at 31% and feeling very underfunded at 27%. So there is a big lean in there towards not feeling well funded. So trading, I think this is the last part now then. So trading, have you or any member of your team ever received training on due diligence, ethics, and or reputational risk? And again, a fairly split result. So we had 57% here say yes, they had received training, and 43% saying no. And I think that is quite interesting, isn't it, really? I mean, what we're really saying there is there's quite a big portion of organizations conducting due diligence, trying to protect their reputation, but we've never had any training on it. And I definitely think that's nowhere near the fault of researchers that are trying to do this research, but more that it's difficult to come by the training in this area. And I know at PyroTalks we're trying to get together more and more material on this, but it is quite unique. When I was trying to do this report, I was trying to find some comparable sectors in this kind of area of reputational risk, and I don't think there's many comparable things here. It's a very complex and unique aspect of fundraising, it seems. So yeah, there's quite a split result there. And I just thought we'd have a quick look at that by sector that responded. So arts and culture, 87% said yes to training. Higher education, 61% said yes to training. Medical, 45% said yes to training. And other, 43% said yes to training. So at the last part then, and then we'll just go over these recommendations. And if people want to ask questions, we can have a look at some of those. So recommendations, just 8 key points that I wanted to make, or what I got from the survey. And of course, everyone will get their own interpretation from the survey. The first one for me, though, as I was combing through the results and all the different levels of the data, I felt really, especially where we have this consistent polarization in deployment in comparable organizations, I felt really that the sector had not quite come to terms yet with a coherent logic as to why it was doing due diligence, really, in a way, on risk in general. Like I said earlier, like, why are we doing this, and through what perspective? I mean, we know why we do this, we're protecting, but from what perspective? Are we looking at it from the perspective of our own internal ethics? Are we looking at it from our supporters' point of view? Are we looking at it from newspapers' point of view? Like what level that they report on, etc., etc. And I think because we don't have that necessarily pinned down yet, what is proportionate risk research becomes anyone's guess. Whether or not 100 reports is adequate, or whether 9 a year well targeted ones is a better thing to do. We still don't seem to have much guidance on that, and on what is best practice in general. So I hope really that survey is the start of that journey, really, to that kind of cross department, cross organization conversation about how we really define risk or seek to manage risk. And I think the second one for me was some kind of periodic review, because this is still early stages, and I think we could see like this a lot, like I was saying, dichotomy results. So some had gift executive committees, some didn't, some did conflict of interest, or some didn't, or there are very different ways of compiling the gift acceptance committees too. Then it felt like doing a periodic review of due diligence within your organization is probably a good idea in this early stage, to make sure that gaps are not there, or that things are proportionate after a while of doing this certain level of process. Maybe we feel it's too unproportionate or there's too much work, and it's stuff like that I think would come out if you do some regular periodic reviews. So that would be the idea there. So even if it's been accepted by a trustee board, etc., maybe it's still good that we do have a bit more regular reviews of what we're doing in this early stage. Number 3 was stakeholder research. So have we ever surveyed our own supporters and checked what our reputational tolerances are? What donation levels or types of donations and issues really matter to our supporters? I don't think I've ever seen a kind of a research or an internal project or survey which looks at our own supporters and what matters to them. And maybe that can help start to guide some of our proportionality in our due diligence. 4 then, revised allocated resources. It was quite clear, wasn't it, that people felt underfunded and the budgets themselves didn't really come across as massive. And I think more exploration is needed, discussion and realism on costs. I think maybe as researchers in the sector, we might need to push a bit more ourselves and clarify a bit more why this is important to have an increase of level of resources. And here 5, uplift knowledge. The absence of training definitely seemed to impact on things like confidence. And there was definitely a lower feeling of confidence within the department's ability if a crisis were to occur. So more training, obviously, for the whole department, I think is good. And I'll just come back to that in the last point in a moment, that it really should be a whole department thing. So 6, enhanced neutrality was another one. It felt like there was a potential over-reliance on fundraising staff organising our own gifts, which could be unavoidable really because of resources. But nonetheless, there were a lot of organisations without committees, and then it wasn't typical that there was a neutral party should we really need one. So of course, establishing or uplifting neutrality wherever possible seems like a good idea, or establish a committee where there is none. And the last 2 then, so deepen report content. If we don't have things like conflict of interest, it's worth checking that list against road processes to see whether or not roughly we are checking everything. I'm not saying that this is exhaustive either. Probably need to add a few more options in there. Now, the last question for me, which seemed to be what came out the most at the end of looking at all these results, was that there needs to be a clearer delineation between prospect research and due diligence. And I felt like some of the issues that were coming across, this polarization or low resource or whatever, was really a result of conflating 2 things. I think due diligence was given to, if you like, prospect research as a responsibility because they were simply already doing research. But actually, they're very different functions, aren't they? And I know that those of us that have done these reports and been involved with building these processes know how different it really can be to prospect research. So my feeling is, and it's not necessarily, this is obviously up for debate, is that clearer delineations like dedicated staff, dedicated job titles, dedicated budget lines may help attract more resource and elevate seriousness in organisations. So that's, I think that's all the results. Yeah, so that took about 40 minutes to get through. I hope those are some useful results. It'd be good to see if there's any questions come through. I'm not sure the Q&A box was working, so I'll take a look at some of the things coming through the chats here. Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting some questions here. Does the research office have ultimate responsibility for due diligence research? What does the organisation's legal general counsel office have in providing due diligence? Yeah, so where does the responsibility really stand? It's a good conversation to have, and it's a shame this isn't a meeting format. We could have got some people on camera and have a bit of a chat about this, but yeah, where does the ultimate responsibility stand? Well, when I was doing a bit more research into what happens when things go wrong, and I've got some really interesting stats, figures, and case studies of where things went wrong with due diligence, and where they go wrong, they do go really wrong. But really, it's what you tend to find is it's the most senior leader that resigns. So it's either the CEO, the vice chancellor of organisations seem to be the ones that resign in the end. So, whose responsibility is it really? Well, I imagine if it's going to affect their job, maybe they should feel that it's partly, of course, their responsibility too. And I'm sure many do, but maybe the question is, where should it sit? Yeah, and I think ultimately it would feel logical, wouldn't it, that due diligence is sat away from the departments that are actually bringing in the gifts. but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think actually quite a lot of us do enjoy doing due diligence too as a useful exercise. So we've got a comment here that legal says they don't have the resources and the development office should do it. Yeah, and the development office says that we don't have the expertise. Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? How do we do these things? So there's quite a lot of good comments coming through here in the chat. How often should you review a due diligence report for repeat donations? Yeah, that's the interesting one. When the process that I've been involved in, and this would be an interesting question, wouldn't it, to see whether people do this in the next survey. How often should you renew a due diligence report for repeat donations? When I've been involved with this, basically every time a repeat donation is done, the primary report is updated. It's just checked whether or not there's been any big changes within the current status. And I think they would still be signed off by the gift acceptance committee as well. Just to add that comment there. When doing so we've got a comment here. We've just moved on. When doing the documents, we need to liaise closely with the fundraisers to put the information in context. Yeah. Did any of the organisations surveyed use automatic screening processes, third party, to flag potential risk factors? So we did actually have a question about resources, and I didn't put that in this report, in this presentation, but I think it's in the report. I mean, we had some, obviously, we put out some good resources and people just tick them, but it didn't really seem to add any extra meaning into it. It's just whether or not you use that resource or not. So Louisa, this could be a good question for future. You know, do we do automatic screening as part of a due diligence process? My hunch would be not many people would use an automatic one. Many do want to do a direct bespoke research. Yes, we've got a comment here. This research backs up what we do. I think this is prospective for gold. Often find that many organisations are still developing gift acceptance policies. Not having one does not make the research broader and more general. Yeah. So I'm just going to scroll up, see if there's any more questions. It would be interesting to see for a future question whether those surveyed feel that the level of funding at their organisation represents a major reputational risk to the organisation. So I need to kind of, I don't quite understand that question, Andrew, I think, but if you want to pop that back in. So we've got, there's a organisation here citing that there are 2 levels, initial risk assessment and a comprehensive. All actively managed prospects get at least the initial one, regardless of giving. Principal level donors tend to get comprehensive level. We have a list of resources we check for each type. Yeah, I think that was what I mentioned earlier, and I think that was kind of a difficult thing to conceptualize and try to put in the survey, but we should try next time. But that when we went to the slide earlier about at what stage is due diligence conducted, that was what the comment was I was trying to make, that some people have started to do an initial research or risk assessment at various different stages, whether that's the prospect's just been assigned or whether the prospect has just been researched. People are starting to do this initial check. And the process that I used to run, that's where we ended up evolving towards in the end, was doing a quick initial check, because it seemed to be, you know, in the end, that if something serious came up much later down the line, so much more resource was lost as a result of that. When if we would have just done a quick initial check, hopefully the really big stuff comes up. Yeah, so this is, I think, Andrew, this is your question. Would be interested for a future question of whether those surveyed feel the level of funding at their organisation represents a major future reputational risk to the organisation, hit to income. So I imagine what the curiosity there is, do we feel that when things can go wrong, that they will impact our income? And I guess this comes back to this whole thing about training for a whole department. I don't think people really know how serious it can be. You know, LSE, we had the infamous story, didn't we, of them having to resign. When I looked at Oxfam stats, when they had those issues go on, which is slightly different from due diligence, but it was still their reputation, you know, their income plummeted severely. And so it really does affect things. Yeah, so I think there's probably more awareness there, isn't there, that needs to be done about how, when things go wrong, can affect organisations. And the question where we were talking about preparing, how prepared do organisations feel for when things do go wrong? You know, the kind of things that I've learned through having some speakers at PyroTalks who are PR experts, and it's things like they have templates. They have different types of templates, responses ready if such and such events were to happen. They have charts, you know, if this was to happen, this is what we would do. If this was to happen, this is what we would do. You know, and that I don't think I've seen that as part of any due diligence process so far. I've seen some really good intricate ones, but I don't think I've ever seen, okay then, if things do go wrong, what do we actually do? There doesn't seem to be any training like that or any plans like that. It just seems to be trying to avoid it from happening. But maybe we can't avoid it forever. Did organisations surveyed have a formula or point system to measure risk, or was it mainly written policy? The reason I couldn't answer that question, we didn't really ask that question. Do we do a point scoring system, or is it mainly written? My hunch would be that it was mainly written. The ones I've seen these days, I know what they do is tend to have a template of an acceptance form, and they have different levels of whether they accept, you know, each one. Is it having an influence on the organisation? Yes or no. You know, do we know the sources of funds? Yes or no. And those there seems to be that kind of level of reports. So I guess, you know, we're kind of looking at, it's almost like a point-based system there. It would be useful to find out how organisations manage retrospective due diligence. Yes, yeah, I was involved with a conversation recently about looking at plaques in an organisation. You know, they realise that they've had all these plaques up for years and years and years, but they don't necessarily know the history of the people on them. As we've seen, there's definitely been a revisionist approach to looking at the past. And, you know, we've seen things like statues come down, and, you know, do we need to relook at the names across our departments, if we're in universities or the like, about what those reputations might be. So we've got a comment here. We have a red, amber, green checklist for donations between 100,000 and 1 million, which can be accepted within the development office. So just a comment up here that I wanted to go back to. So we've got a quick comment from Chris here. Probably good to distinguish between due diligence as a more formal process-driven exercise as the type of due diligence research that we all should do in the course of initial research identification. The latter you could embed at early stages yet, but you wouldn't want every prospect to go up to a gift acceptance committee before assignment. Yes, definitely. And again, that was kind of hopefully what I was trying to get across in that thing about at what point is the due diligence done. A quick initial check does not mean they would have to go up to a committee. Yeah, you don't have to sign off everything. And I think that's what's going to be quite useful by some of the results. We can see that some organisations, CEOs or senior staff are getting involved with quite granular scenarios. And then on the other hand, we've got people that are, if you like, lower down in the senior management, but they're signing off massive donations on their own. You know, that seems like sharing some of that responsibility, this kind of survey might help level that out, level the playing field for some people. Got a question here. Did you have any conversations around risk levels, high, medium, low? No, not necessarily high, medium, low. That's a good point. When people are doing their reports, do they categorize the list between high, medium, low? I know the reports we used to do, we had traffic light. So all the issues that we had, we listed if we found them, and we coded them by color, so that if a committee was looking at them and they don't have time to look at all of them, they can just quickly look at the red parts or those allocated red as we feeling high risk. But what we found, and I'm sure there's plenty more conversations to happen in the sector, was we felt we didn't have the authority to say what was high, medium or low risk. And again, maybe there needs to be more conversation between senior leaders and these teams about, as an organisation, what is high risk, what is low risk, what don't we totally accept. And I think that conversation is happening a lot just in fundraising teams, but not necessarily with the organisational leaders as a whole. Yeah, and I think that does leave a bit of exposure. So we've got someone here. Yeah, would be interesting to get more info percentages on independent members on accepting committees. Yeah, I found that was interesting, seeing neutral members, yeah, and independent members on committees. So I think we're at time there, we're at an hour. There's some really good comments coming through. So I'm just going to try and copy some of these, and maybe I can try and address some of them and get them shared. Thanks, Kerry. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to try and copy some of these and get these shared. What I think might be good is anyway set up some kind of conversation on due diligence. Maybe after this survey has gone out for a bit, we could put out another session where people can come to and we can kind of discuss some of the deployment of due diligence that bit more, because it seems like there's so many conversations that we're still to have about it all, and it'd be great to continue that as a result of the thinking that this survey might bring. So I hope anyway that there's some good results there and it could be useful for benchmarking. So thanks very much for joining, and some really good comments. Thanks very much. I wish we could do longer. And we will send out this recording in the email, but we'll also send out the report when it's ready too. And it's very similar to this. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Wesley, and hope to see everyone soon.